This video is brought to you by PrizePicks. Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to QnA, the show where I take your questions and answer them here in video format. If you want to make sure your question hits this video, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that notification bell so you can be notified when I put the community post up for the questions. That's where you can ask the questions for the week. I will take the questions from that post and then answer them then on the corresponding show that weekend. We got a ton of questions to get into, so let's just jump into it. First question comes from Key Co, who says this. Q, some are making a big deal of Deshaun Watson's physical issues the last couple of years, but is it possible that not actively dealing with court cases may improve his mental condition and his overall quarterback play? I think that part of it was a underrated factor in his struggles when he joined Cleveland, right? I don't think the Browns thought about it enough. I don't think people thought about it enough. How that active issue, right, having the court cases because of the 30 allegations of sexual harassment or assault that he had on his name and having to deal with settlements, lawyers. I imagine the collateral damage from those things was significant, right? Like, you don't get that kind of case brought up on you without other things in your life suffering because of it. I imagine it created a great deal of stress for Deshaun Watson, as well as this whole situation allegedly created a lot of stress on a lot of other people too, right? And allegedly that was Deshaun Watson's doing. So, not me saying out here, oh yeah, pity Deshaun Watson, but I can understand how that could have affected him. Do I think him not actively dealing with that could be a huge lift to him mentally? Yeah, I think that that's possible. I do wonder if it's a situation where it's too little too late. Like, has he missed too much football? Has he accumulated too many injuries for that to start mattering? I think if he had been done with all of this stuff before he came to Cleveland in 2022, I do think that we see a different Deshaun Watson. But given what he's been through over the last 4 years here and how much football he's missed since he's come to the Cleveland Browns, I don't know if this is coming soon enough for it to make a difference for him. But you're right. It was an underrated factor in why he was struggling. And, I remember talking to people in the media at that time, right, where they would say, like, the pattern with Deshaun in 2022 and 23 was you would see him in practice and he would look great for a couple of days, and then something in the news would drop about his cases and then struggling again. And that's something that I've heard by multiple people multiple times who were at these practices while Deshaun Watson was trying to come back. So again, it could have had a big deal on him. But at this point, after 2 Achilles surgeries, after the throwing surgery fiasco, after missing 700 days again, will that be enough to overcome those things? I think there's a huge question mark there. If this had been cleared up 3 years ago, I think it would have had a real chance to make a big difference. I don't know if it's coming too little too late right now. You know what I mean? Maybe just being removed from it mentally is going to be big for him. But it's something to consider, right? If I thought it was a reported and underestimated part of why he struggled, I have to imagine that the opposite could be true, that once he's done with that there's a chance that he could see a lift from it mentally because he's not dealing with that anymore. Pan Gas with the next question, who says this. Hey Q, it should It's almost been 2 weeks since the Browns schedule came out. I'm not sure how I feel about the schedule. Do you think it's a good or bad thing that we're opening the season on the road against the Jaguars and the Buccaneers? I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's something that just kind of is, right? A 2-week opening stretch in September in Florida is going to be rough. But if we're being realistic about this football team, I don't think we should expect to win a ton of games early, right? I think that this is a team that's probably going to struggle early. So will they struggle because of the heat and the humidity and the temperature and Florida being unbearable during that time of the year? Yeah, I think that's going to cause some struggle. But is that struggle that would have been likely anyways, given that they have 6 new offensive linemen, 5 new week 1 starters, 2 new wide receivers, a whole new offensive coordinator, possibly definitely a different day 1 starting quarterback than what they had last year. Like, all of those things kind of smell like a slow start to the season to me. So whether that slow start happens and we blame it on the weather or we blame it on the players because of the situation they're in, that's kind of what it's determining. But that's why I just don't really have a feeling about it either way, because I expect this team to struggle early. You know what I mean? Sad says this. Hey, Q, if the Browns were able to get Sorsby in the supplemental for a 3rd rounder, would he fall into a category of quarterback that they should commit to for a few years and truly see if he's someone who can be their long-term QB? I know this is a strategy we would like them to take for a promising QB taken in the early rounds of the draft, but I wonder if Sorsby entering the league in such an odd way would change how this is specifically handled. Love all the work that you put in. I would also like to mention that the Browns have only had one franchise quarterback since that term has become a thing, and we did get that guy through the supplemental draft for very different reasons than Brendan Sorsby, but definitely did get him through the supplemental draft, so maybe that's the draft we can win. But in all seriousness, does Brendan Sorsby fall into the category of guys they should commit to for a few years and truly see if there's someone? I would say conditionally, yes. But the condition is if you fall into a top draft pick quarterback situation, you're not going to say no to that, right? Like if we go all in on Brendan Sorsby and we give him a couple of years, but one of those years he stinks and we end up with the number 1 overall pick and that guy looks like a no-brainer at quarterback, then we're going to take that quarterback, right? So, yes, commit to him unless we fall into something. I don't think we should be searching for things to replace Brendan Sorsby as he's the quarterback, right? We shouldn't be looking for trades or anything like that or signing free agent quarterbacks to start or reaching for quarterbacks in the draft. But if you do fall into something, I don't think you say no to it. But as long as you don't fall into anything, then yeah, you commit to Sorsby for the next few years. If you take him in the 3rd round of the supplemental draft, because you're basically saying you think that this guy is worthy of that by taking him in the supplemental draft. You're marking that territory for him. So that's what I would feel comfortable with. Commit to him, build around him, unless we fall into something we can't say no to. And that happened with like Drew Brees, right? Drew Brees was a 2nd round pick. They committed to him and then they fell into Phillip Rivers. They went with Phillip Rivers. Ended up working out, right? The same thing happened with the Titans, right? They had Will Levis, they committed to him, and then they fell into the number 1 overall pick, and then they went Cam Ward, and then they committed to that. So that's kind of the situation Sorsby would be in. The Hate Report says this: love the show, only place I come for real analysis. Appreciate that. Is there leadership concern with Myles and Denzel not at OTAs? Doesn't seem to be a 5-alarm fire, but if this goes into minicamp, well, it's not going to go into minicamp with Denzel. Pretty sure it's not going to go into minicamp with Myles Garrett. Here's the thing. Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward have always been very good players for the Cleveland Browns. But what's also been true since Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward have gotten here is that they both have not demonstrated a desire to really be the leaders of their respective units, right? Denzel Ward, he does some leadership stuff. He definitely brings along his young guys. But when Martin Emerson was here, he was more of a vocal leader than Denzel was, right? Myles Garrett, we've talked about this. If the Browns are the Avengers, Myles is the Hawk, right? Captain America is Carson Schlesinger, but Myles is the guy who goes in there and he's your ace of spade, right? That's what you use Myles for. Just because a player is really good does not also mean that they're going to be the super leadership-y type guy, right? The guys who naturally fall into those roles, who naturally fall into those responsibilities, will take those responsibilities. And I think the Browns defense is fine in that regard because that's where, Quincy Williams wants to step up. That's where Carson Schlesinger wants to step up. And especially in Carson Schlesinger's case, he's a good enough player to where that's fine, right? Emmanuel McNeil-Warren seems like somebody who wants to step into that role if he becomes good enough there. Grant Delpit is somebody who stepped into that role. Your very best players don't have to be your leaders. Your good players, you have to have good players who are your leaders, but doesn't have to be your best players that are your leaders. You just need those guys to go with the flow for whoever's leading the team and not contradict them. And I don't think Myles is doing that, and I don't think Denzel is doing that. So, no, I don't really think it's a leadership concern because I don't look at Myles and Denzel as people who have taken that mantle of leading the football team, right? They're definitely some of the most important members of the team, but the Browns and the guys setting the culture and who are really invested in that, those guys are at OTAs, and those guys always show up to OTAs. So, Myles, he does his thing. Denzel does his thing. I'm not really tripping on that, Daryl says this: I don't expect Garrett to be traded this year, but if we can't start winning soon, I feel like it's inevitable. That being said, if there's a trade to be made, I believe Myles to the Rams for Jarrett Verse and a couple of firsts makes sense. The Rams already did a deal like this for Goff and Stanford. Verse would likely be the fit for Cleveland. It's timeline better than Myles. What do you think? I think that's along the lines of what a Myles trade will look like, which is a promising defensive player paired with first-round picks. And maybe even a third-round pick on top of that, right? It's going to be a lot of draft compensation and then a bird in the hand, right, for Myles Garrett. That's going to be what's needed to make a trade for him. And I agree. If the Browns can't find a quarterback, if they can't get to winning football soon, then it's going to be inevitable that they have to make a move for Myles because it's going to start to make more and more sense. So, yeah, I would agree with this. But next, we'll get to some more questions. But first, I got to thank my sponsor, PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a fun way to earn cash while you watch your favorite teams. No complex betting rules. Just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. Here are my picks for this upcoming season, AFC North edition. Jimmy Bernard, I have less than 475. This has to do with volume available in Pittsburgh's offense. Quincy Judkins, I have over 975. Browns improved line. I think the run game's going to be better with it. Chase Brown, under 900 yards. Joe Burrow equals less rushing yards usually for the Bengals offense. Mark Andrews, more than 475 yards. Lamar's going to need a safety blanket. Check to see if PrizePicks is available in your state. You could follow me on the app at Quinn_C to see all my lineups. Download the PrizePicks app today. Play $5 and get $50 in lineup to download the app using the link in the description. Next question comes from Gabe, who says this: how long is Andrew Berry's leash as general manager, and can we be confident in knowing he won't be going anywhere regardless of the win-loss total from this upcoming season? I think if it's up to the Browns, they want to keep Andrew Berry, and he has a significant leash. Unless things are a complete disaster this year, he's probably safe. And I think he's probably safe until, they fired Kevin, probably another 3 years. He's probably safe until the end of 2028, more than likely. Again, if this year's a disaster, if next year's a disaster or something like that, then anything's on board. But as long as these seasons aren't disasters, he's more than likely safe. All right, this next question comes from Brad, who says this. Hey, Q, hope you're doing well. Are there any free agents that are still out there that you want the Browns to sign? Like you mentioned in your video, there's some positions with really shaky depth. Are there any names we should keep our eye out on to be late signings? So I don't know if the Browns are interested in some of these names, right? But if we look at corner, the names that kind of stand out to me, that kind of makes sense for the Cleveland Browns are like taking a chance on like a Marshawn Lattimore, given that he's from the area. Maybe he'd be interested in playing here. You can also look at somebody like Jeffrey Okudah, who could be interesting. He's not been good at any point in his career, but he is a former first-round pick. He's under 30. He's worth, I think, giving a flyer to at the very least, right? So if we're talking about corner, I'm probably, sticking on Marshawn as somebody you could bring in to give you some better backup corner depth if that's something he's okay with. The other two I would look at, and I know I'm pretty Cleveland heavy today, but Jerome Baker is somebody I think is interesting to bring back. He was here last year. He was solid last year. I understand the Browns want a younger player to fill that role, but if you're halfway through camp and nobody's really filled it, then give that a look. And then Bobby Okereke, who was a good player at one point, still under 30, still a chance that he might be able to be useful for you. But those are the kind of free agents that I would look at. Guys that you would give a flyer, basically. Not any real high expectations, to just try to be some depth. Zeppelini says this. Hey, Q. Also, before I get in, Nick Chubb always, right? I want to bring back Nick Chubb. Zeppelini says this. Hey, Q. I'm always curious of the sophomore slump or a dip from a stellar freshman season. But what can the new DC provide Carson or Graham from the dip into performance? Same for Judkins and Fannin with Todd. I do think if there is one player that is more set up for a sophomore slump, it's probably Harold Fannin. Because the amount of targets probably isn't going to be there for him to replicate those numbers. As far as Carson Schlesinger and Mason Graham goes, both their biggest issues was strength when they were out there. So I think this being their second year will actually be more helpful to them than anything, because they'll just be able to spend a lot of time building strength that they need. Judkins, I think, is going to be a different deal, where maybe he had a sophomore slump in year one, because he's going to be in a much better situation to succeed, hopefully, than he was in last year. So that's kind of where I would sit on that. Sim says this. Hey, Q, if Deshaun is only slightly better than Shedeur, do you think Monken gives him the start? I would rather see a slightly worse product if it meant that Shedeur is getting a chance to prove that he could be the guy, instead of watching Watson piss me off one final year. If Deshaun looks light years better than Shedeur, fair enough. But if the competition is remotely close, I'm taking Shedeur without a shadow of a doubt. Love the content. Here's the one caveat I'll throw in there, right? Is if Shedeur, like, what is Deshaun better at than Shedeur? And what is Shedeur specifically struggling at? Because we're talking about this like the quarterback competition is going to spit out a score at the end of it, right? Like, these guys are going to go through camp, and then Deshaun going to get a 75 out of 100, and Shedeur gets a 74. Who we picking? But that's not how this is going to go. If Shedeur is struggling with game management still, he won't be the starter at the beginning of the season. If Shedeur is struggling to make decisions that make sense at the end of games, he won't be the starter at the beginning of the season. Like, he could be as good at, your average 7-on-7. He could be as good at 11-on-11s as Deshaun. But if they work the game management stuff and he's still struggling with that, if he's making bad decisions based on game situations that you're practicing or based on what you're seeing and asking of him in preseason, then he's not going to play, because that's going to be what determines who starts at quarterback this year at the beginning of the season. Who is going to be able to manage the game the best? If Shedeur is at a place to where he's equal to Deshaun in his ability to manage the game, then Shedeur will start. If Shedeur is at a place where he's not there, then Deshaun's going to play. Because Todd Monken has to win games, right? Todd Monken is aware of this. He knows that he's not going to get a ton of head coaching opportunities, and he knows that his ability to keep this job is going to be contingent on his ability to win football games. So he has to win games. And Todd's going to pick the quarterback that can manage the game the best. You know, it's not going to be about upside in 11-on-11, who has the best highlight. It's going to be about who can manage the game the best. And that's where Shedeur, I think, had his largest struggles that I don't think people talk about enough, right? A lot of people talk about the sacks and stuff, but part of the reason the sacks mattered were the game management situations he put himself in. But that's going to be what determines this. How is he managing the game, and who's managing the football game of it better? Is it Deshaun? Is it Shedeur? That will determine who wins it. Cam's Cut Up says this: when should we expect to hear that Sorsby is entering the supplemental draft, and do you think AB will spend a 4th-round pick? I do think AB will spend a 4th-round pick, and I think we'll hear it around the middle of June, right? I think he got all the way till July to actually do it. But that's my thoughts on QnA. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.